Hi, I'm Dan Boyd.
And I'm Megan Gleason.
Welcome to Rounding Up the Roundhouse.
If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source.
Today we're catching up with the second week of the legislative session, which has gotten rather busy all of a sudden. Catch us up a little bit, Megan.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some big bills already introduced, and usually in these 60-day sessions, things don't get this crazy until maybe the last 30 days. But we kind of expected things to start rolling out pretty quickly, faster this year. Like we've mentioned before on the podcast, it's the governor's last 60 days, so I think people are really trying to push things through, and we've seen some big bills being heard. I know last night you stayed up for a while trying to hear that criminal competency bill. We had paid family medical leave earlier this week. We had some greenhouse gas emissions limits bill, but lots going on. Do you want to talk about the criminal competency bill hearing?
Yeah. So the House Consumer Public Affairs Committee met for 6 hours yesterday, wrapped up at just before 8 o'clock, which a little too early in a 60-day session for those kind of hours. But they did take up 4 bills, including, as you mentioned, the criminal competency bill. Representative Christine Chandler has been really working on that, and it got a boost yesterday. The governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, had a news conference, and she said she supported the bill and kind of liked a lot of what was in it. This is really complicated stuff, so I think a lot of legislators are still kind of learning what's in there, exactly what this bill would do, and how it would make changes to the state system for treating, defendants with mental illness. It got a unanimous vote, 6-0 out of that first House committee. Even the 2 Republicans voted in favor of it and said it was a positive start to treating crime issues in New Mexico. Obviously, it's still got a long ways to go, but I think that's a positive sign for that bill. Maybe getting some bipartisan support and maybe moving quickly here as we move into the second of the 8 weeks here of the 60-day session. So.
And I feel like a lot of people are confused about the bill, including legislators themselves. It has to do with involuntary commitment. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, even a few legislators were saying they kind of need a flow chart, to keep up with all the different terms in the bill. I think what's a little confusing is there's 2 different types of kind of competency, talking about even, which is in criminal cases, if someone is deemed competent, to stand trial. And then in civil cases, or if they can be kind of forced to get treatment under some programs, including what's called assisted outpatient treatment. That's a court-run program. So there's kind of two different paths we're talking about here, and this bill would make a few changes to both of them. One of the big changes it would make is currently, if competency is raised in a court in a case, there's an evaluation whether that individual is competent, but this would also add to that evaluation whether the defendant is dangerous either to themselves or others. So kind of adding another piece onto that evaluation, which would kind of then determine which path is taken from there.
Yeah. And remind me, Dan, I can't remember. Did this one come up during the special session? I know the governor.
There was, this issue has been talked about a lot. This specific bill, Representative Chandler said she's been working on it for months, even kind of before the special session and certainly after it. So this is a little bit new, the proposal itself, but it's an issue that I think legislators have been trying to kind of figure out and get a better handle on for the last year or so. But we're also seeing it's not the only kind of behavioral health bill. There's also a package of bills that we're going to see in a Senate committee today, including setting up a new behavioral health care trust fund, which, so these bills are also moving pretty quickly. And as you mentioned, for hefty bills to already be hitting committee in the second week of a session and, kind of on track to get to the floor, possibly in the next week or two, which is pretty fast for a 60-day session. I think we're all kind of still adjusting to the pace a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act come up really fast. I mean, I think it was that the first week that we heard that?
Well, I think that was on, Monday that the hearing?
Monday. Yeah. Feels like a week ago already.
It does warp your sense of time. You covered that bill last year as well. does the dynamic seem different this year, or did it kind of get a similar vibe? Or
I think kind of as to be expected, Republicans still are drawing a hard line. We heard it in a House committee, and it was a couple hours of debate, most of it taken up by Republicans not wanting to see the bill passed, and that hasn't changed. But last year, the bill died on the House floor by 2 votes, and some of those people who voted against it, they lost their primaries, they aren't in the Roundhouse anymore. So kind of the big question has been, do they have the votes now? And yesterday, the Paid Family and Medical Leave Coalition held a press conference, and Senator Mimi Stewart, who is sponsoring the bill, spoke at it, and she mentioned that they have all of the House votes they need. So she seems pretty confident that this is going to get through, because if it gets through the House, it's already passed the Senate twice before over the past couple of years. So there's a pretty good bet it'll get to the governor's desk. But that's another interesting thing, because the governor hasn't outright voiced her support for this. She didn't mention it in her State of the State address, and I've reached out to the governor's office to ask if they support the bill, and they said they're still analyzing it. So
maybe not a real top priority, or kind of still a little unclear how much he's going to go to bat for that bill.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to bring up, anyone in the Roundhouse for a while, you hear about FIRs, and these are fiscal impact reports that legislative analysts do for bills. And with the pace of bills moving so fast, we did hear a few concerns this week raised by Senate Republicans about that these FIRs haven't been posted yet on some of the bills, and they're already having committee hearings on them. And that prompted some interesting back and forth. I think one of the concerns is with so many new members, and still trying to kind of read these bills and understand exactly what's in them and the pace they're moving. Not only is it hard for the public sometimes, but even for some of the new legislators trying to make sense of that. Senator Pat Woods kind of raised that issue. And my understanding, it's not a rule that a FIR be posted a certain amount of time before a committee hearing, but it is kind of a practice. So that's something else to keep an eye on. These poor legislative analysts trying to come up with their FIRs for hundreds of bills already, but certainly something that legislators rely on to dive into these proposals.
Yeah. And I mean, that's usually why last Friday was kind of a slow day, so everybody could catch up. But the staff just hasn't really gotten enough time for the amount of bills that have already been proposed. I mean, it's over 200. It's probably much more than that at this point. And I think the last 60-day session, it was over 1,000 bills were introduced. So it's a huge lesson. Like you said, the new legislators, the bills are so tough to understand, and those legislative analysis reports are so helpful to just get that kind of common language understanding of what exactly the bill does.
Right, and what exactly the budget implications might be and things like that. I mean, I counted yesterday more than 40 bills dealing with crime and criminal penalties already.
Wow.
I'm sure that number's only going to grow, but it does seem, a few legislators talked about yesterday at the governor's press conference that Senator Mo Maestas even said the governor lit a fire under us on these crime issues last year. And even though they didn't agree on the bills, it seems like there might be a little more momentum, this session. I think we weren't quite sure what the reception would be, but the Senate Judiciary Committee is even hearing a few crime bills this afternoon. My understanding, they might not vote on the bills, but the fact that they're actually debating them, and this is a pretty key committee for getting legislation dealing with crime and the judicial system. And the fact that they're already hearing bills at this point in the session, I think is a sign that it is a priority. And, instead of during the final week of the session going until midnight and people trying to see which bills get through. So, of course, there's going to be some bills, I think, that get some more pushback on crime, but some of them, I think, could, move a little more quickly. So I know you've been tracking some climate bills and kind of environmental bills as well. And some of those seem like they're already on the move additionally.
Yeah, and one of them, the Clear Horizons and Greenhouse Gas Emissions Bill, I believe what it's called. It just got heard yesterday, and it passed its first committee. And this is something also that's on the governor's priority agenda. In 2019, one of her first executive orders was limiting greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 by 45% compared to 2005 levels. New Mexico still isn't on track to meet that goal. And so the governor has been wanting to codify that executive order for years, according to Senator Mimi Stewart, who's also sponsoring this bill. And so Stewart introduced a bill that would codify this and add some additional limitations in 2040 and 2050. So it was kind of a robust debate. It's an interesting one because greenhouse gas emissions, this bill isn't just targeting the oil and gas industry in New Mexico. It's everyone who's emitting greenhouse gas emissions. But in New Mexico, oil and gas is the number one source of greenhouse gas emissions. So, of course, you kind of see this debate that we see every year in the Roundhouse of a lot of Republican senators or representatives who come from the heart of oil and gas land in New Mexico, and they don't want to see the industry hurt, which funds upwards of a third of our state budget. We rely really heavily on those revenues. But on the other side,
jumped out to me in your story, which was a really good story. But that I think all four of the senators on the Senate Conservation Committee either live in or near the Permian Basin. So certainly kind of a big contrast between the opponents and the proponents on this bill, kind of not only philosophically, but also just kind of way of life and experiences they bring to these issues. So. Yeah.
And I was in the Permian a couple months back last year, and it's funny because I was talking to somebody and they were like, we don't live here because it's pretty. It's a pretty bland area. You've got that oil smell. Like, we live here because we are producing the state's revenues from oil and gas. They're very proud of the industry. And the other thing I want to point out that's interesting about this bill is that Senator Joseph Cervantes, who's a Democrat from Las Cruces, voted against it. He was the only Democrat to vote against it. And he said he supported the intent of the bill, which was to address the climate crisis and limit air pollution and all of that stuff. But he didn't agree with the language in the bill. He thought it was going to end up with millions of dollars in litigation, which is, a fair point. He chairs the Senate Judiciary, is that right? Yeah. And so he often brings up these language points. He's an attorney, and the bill isn't set to go to Senate Judiciary, and so I think he ultimately voted against it with those concerns.
Yeah, and maybe that's kind of a sign that the bill could, even for some Democrats, might pause a little bit on it, but certainly some strong support from different groups as well. It seemed like my understanding that committee had so many people lined up, that a lot of folks, including certain journalists, weren't even able to get into the committee room. So
yeah, no, it was. I got in there 10 minutes early. That was my mistake. I should have showed up earlier, but it was one of the smaller rooms and all of the seats were full. It was cool. There was a middle school class that came to speak at public comment, but all of the seats were taken out. Fire marshal said nobody can be standing in the back. It's a hazard. And so there was dozens of people waiting outside in the hall. And the Republican senators actually made sure when they did a count, raising hands in support and opposition, that someone went outside and counted those in the hallway who couldn't get in to the room. So yeah, I was watching from the media room.
Well, and that's been one observation for me. Just I think after a few years during the pandemic, when the Capitol was off limits to the public and there weren't as many people around, it's packed again this year. It feels like it's the place to be in New Mexico. If you want to get a spot in the parking garage or get a seat in the committee room, you got to get there early because there's a lot of people, a lot of student groups that I've seen as well. Just a lot of lobbyists are back, in full force, and a lot of interested, just citizens kind of testifying on these bills. So it's exciting in a way just to see that many people, but it's also kind of a reminder, that the Roundhouse during the rest of the year is kind of quiet, and we can kind of come and go as we want, and it's a lot busier year right now. It's I would say thousands of people coming in and out of the building every day.
Yeah, it's really, really bustling. And the energy, it's very exciting. You've got these kind of tense debates going on different issues, but I don't know, it feels like in the air, like everybody is kind of happy to be here,
Yeah, no, I pick up on that energy too. So, which can be contagious even on those long days. So, looking ahead, Megan, what's kind of on your radar for the rest of this week, and what are you kind of tracking?
That's a good question. I think every day changes so fast, so we'll certainly see. I know there are some cannabis enforcement bills. One of my colleagues are tracking some trade port stuff going on, which is really interesting with the Trump administration and tariffs and all those kinds of things. So I think I'll kind of keep an open eye and see what pops up on the schedule. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, I think likewise. There's a few education bills one of our colleagues could be listening to this morning as well. One dealing with the hazing laws in New Mexico that's been a big issue because of some of the issues New Mexico State University Athletic Department. Also a bill about incentivizing school districts to ban cell phones in classrooms, which I think a lot of parents and families might have some interest in. So it's getting to that point where we kind of have to pick and choose or either after that or clone ourselves just because there's a lot going on. But I think for now, a lot of the action is going to be in committees. We probably won't see the floor sessions really ramp up for another couple weeks, but certainly the committees are already getting some pretty hefty agendas, and I think we're going to keep us busy, kind of running from committee to committee, keeping up with everything.
Yeah, and we won't see much action on the floors, but tomorrow, Thursday, is our congressional day, and we're expecting to see some of our federal delegation members make an appearance, which is kind of a crazy time to get out of Washington and come to the state.
Yeah, no, it'll be really interesting timing with everything going on in the first weeks of the Trump administration, and then, which is a custom in 60-day sessions that the delegation does come and speak to the legislature, but like you mentioned, a lot going on at the state level and here in the Roundhouse, and a lot going on nationally as well. So it'll be interesting to see kind of their message to legislators and how that's received.
Yeah. Well, I think that's caught everyone up for the second week of the legislature.
I know. I had to double check. I think we're on day 9 today, but it already feels like it's been a month since it started. So. But we really appreciate everyone following our coverage and tuning in for the podcast. And we'll look forward to kind of keeping you informed as best we can in the coming days.
Yeah, well, we'll tune in later this week. In the meantime, you can find these episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. This has been Rounding Up the Roundhouse.
Thanks for listening.